Okay, thank you very much, Chair. First of all, before starting, I just want to thank Victor and his whole team for the excellent job they have done so far, right? This is really a great conference. I think so, and you believe with me, right? Okay, anyway, thank you very much, for putting this one together, and then also for giving me the opportunity also to present you. This is a joint paper with Victor Morindi and also with François Bationo, who is a PhD student at Laval University. Basically, if you look at the title, it's very, very long. That's why actually they shortened the title in the program. Well, what are we doing? Let me just go first on the motivation of this paper, and then I can tell you exactly what we are tackling here in this paper. If you look at after the global financial crisis, of 2008 and 2009, okay, we saw that actually the crisis that started in one country actually spread over the world, other countries. And then since the crisis, there had been renewed interest in terms of real studies on financial integrations and the impact of those financial integrations on the spreading of shocks across countries. And we have a number of papers actually which actually look at that, especially in credit cycles and financial shocks in developing and emerging economies. And why studying emerging economies is that important? If you look at the study by Clausen and Van Oren, on a sample of 137 countries, basically from that study, they show that foreign banks actually have 20% of market share in OECD countries. But if you look at in emerging and developing countries, they are more than actually 50% of a share of market share in those countries. That shows you that actually how important are really foreign banks in emerging and developing countries. And in some countries, actually, they even have like 80% of the market shares. Sorry? Yeah, some countries even 100%. Yeah, I know that, for example, for West Africa, where I'm coming from, for Francophone West Africa, it's almost like 80%. Then it's huge, actually. Why? This is huge. That means that the flows coming through those foreign banks can have a huge impact on those economies, and then especially that on the transmission of shocks in those economies. And more, if you look at most of these developed economies, well, the banking system is weak. Then they have to rely on those international flows coming from outside actually to be able actually to finance their economies. Okay? There is also a belief that basically if we have appropriate macroprudential rules that actually can mitigate some of those systemic risks coming from those, capital flows coming from outside, and then the spreading of shocks, across economies, right? And then if you look at these last years, there have been a lot of work and a lot of talking about macroprudential, rules, and I will come back to that soon. Okay. Then from this background, what we really look at, we really want to shed some light on the role of cross-border banking capital flows and the way, this one actually contributes to the propagations of shocks, in emerging and developing countries. And three specific questions, right? The first one is basically, do really cross-border banking capital flows actually transmit international credit cycle? Because the way we will measure actually the risk, we'll use actually the credit cycle. In the current debate of the Basel and so on, we use actually the credit cycle indicator as kind of signal for future, actually crisis in a country. And then we will be using, this measure actually. Then the foreign capital flows actually helps actually in the propagation of real shocks into the domestic, economies. And then we really want to look at if the commodity prices play something in between, this transmission mechanism. Okay. And then the last question is basically, if we have the right macroeconomic and macroprudential policies in place, can those macroprudential policies actually have some kind of mitigating effect on this transmission of shocks, in the economy, okay, through, like commodity prices? Basically, these are really the main question we really want to look at here. Well, what do we know from the existing literature review? Okay, then if you look at the existing literature review, some of the literature actually look at really the global, what I will call the global push and pull factors that actually will drive cross-border banking capital flows. I mean, that drive actually foreign banks expansions, activities expansion into emerging or developing countries. Then we have a few papers into that. We have other, papers actually looking at the bank network theory and also bank interconnection. I mean, in the morning, actually, we had this study by eBay talking about actually the interbank market and also two other papers talking about the interbank market and so on. Then there are papers actually exploring that, saying that basically when those foreign banks comes, because they're involved in interbank market, then this can be a source of propagation of for shocks actually to the domestic economy, for example. Then there are obvious, literature on bank network theory. And then we have a literature also actually looking at basically the transmission mechanism from actually shocks, credit shocks into the domestic economy. Then those papers have found that it can be through the housing prices. Then because actually the housing prices then can be really the source of the source of propagation of the crisis through the domestic economy. It can be through the exchange rates, okay? Or it can be through asset prices. Then we have our studies, having showed that. Okay? But if you look at all these three, housing prices, exchange rates, or asset prices, but there is something missing, in all this. Because if you look at most of the developing and emerging countries, commodity trades is really huge. Actually. They really depend a lot on commodity trades. Well, then, but if you look at the literature is almost silent on the transmission mechanism through actually the commodity prices. And this is really where we are coming in. And then we think that we are kind of filling the gap in this missing gap actually. Okay. Well, then the main hypothesis basically we really will be testing in this paper is basically foreign financial fluctuations, actually shocks coming from international financial systems will be transmitted to the domestic banking system through actually commodity prices. Okay, then basically this is what we will be looking at, and then this has not been taken into account. If you look at most of the macroprudential rules, actually existing macroprudential rules doesn't seem to be really looking at or really commodity pricing or commodity price cycles and so on. This is basically the contribution actually we think we can bring into this literature. Okay. Well, why commodity price channel? Why do we want to study the commodity price channels, right? Because if you look at a report from UNCTAD and from the Food Agricultural Organization 2017, there seems to be really a link between commodity dependence and human development in most, and especially that, they show that 64% of the developing countries are commodity export dependent. And 45% are import dependent, commodity import dependent. That shows you that really the commodity, the role of commodity export or import at the heart of those economies. There was, a recent study, by Agawar and some of the authors, who shows actually that stock prices of banks, listed banks, actually is very sensitive to commodity prices. Then when the commodity price changes, if it increases or decreases, then it will have either increases stock price or decreases stock prices of those banks. That means that actually the fluctuation of commodity prices has a big impact actually on these banks' activities. Okay. Well, what are the channels actually basically? These are some of the channels. I'm not saying these are the only channels, but if you look at, for example, we can think of the demand side, channel, for example. In increasing the commodity price, can actually lead to increased leverage, okay, of the related sector because, the economy is doing well, they have revenues and so on, and then money can come in, and then also increase, borrowing from the government. And we have this type of experience in many, many countries, actually. Even in my own country, Côte d'Ivoire, for example, the country used to do very, very well because we used to have a lot of money coming for cocoa and coffee. right? Because it's the first producer of cocoa in the world. And then after, when the commodity price start going down, and then the country start having a lot of problems and so on. And at the same time, when the country was getting a lot of money from commodities, this is exactly the same time when the countries actually borrow a lot on the international market and so on. Then we saw that a lot in many, many countries. We can think of actually, and then from this, demand side, then we can think of the banks actually involved in those sectors will get a lot of funds coming in also to be able to lend to those sectors. We can think of the demand side, the supply side. The supply side, basically, in increasing commodity price, we can think of, because the economy is doing well and so on, then the firms, also the household, will be able, to generate more deposit for the banks, and then more liquidity for the banking sector. The banking sector will be able to extend more loans, to the economy. Or we can have combined. The combined channel can be basically, if you take the foreign firms, and foreign banks, basically, bank branches, they can really get money a lot from the home countries. Then the foreign firms with affiliates, these domestic countries, and we see that a lot from the mining company, for example. They don't list the domestic stock exchanges, because they don't need to do that, because they can raise money back home and then bring that money actually to do the exploitations. The same thing also can apply also to the banks, right? The banks affiliates, they can get money from the headquarters and so on. We can also think of in terms of collateral, because the collaterals is a tools actually the bank will use actually usually to mitigate either the moral hazard problem or to mitigate this information asymmetry problem also. But the collateral, we can think also the collateral value depending also on the commodity price. Then if it depends on the commodity price, then this also can explain some of the channels actually we see. Basically, these are some of the reasons why it's important to look at the commodity price channels, and then why actually through the commodity price we can have a real impact of these shocks on the domestic economies. Well, this is just summarizing some of these ideas, and then you see, like for example, if I have flows coming from cross-border capital flows coming to the developing countries, and then it gets spread into the economy and so on, so on. But this is exactly what I just explained. Okay. Well, the other question is why, macro-prudential, policies, right? The way, the macro-prudential, policy is just defined, simple definition. Basically, these are policies used primarily for prudential tools to limit really systemic risk. Basically, these are really that. Because, before, we used to have a micro-prudential regulation. Micro-prudential will look at each bank individually, and then the bank will impose all type of regulation to the bank. But the problem is that one bank having a problem, this can spread throughout the whole economy. Then if you don't have a macro way of looking at these prudential rules, then you get into trouble and so on. That's why we have all these prudential rules, and then extend by the Basel III now. The Basel III rules actually, they have all these macro prudential rules actually. Then we really want to look at, to examine the effect of these macroprudential rules in terms of really having an impact on financial stability actually. Well, this is basically, as I said, what we want to do and why we want to do it, okay? And how do we do it, okay? I'm just jumping to the model. And right now, this is really a work in progress. That's why any comments, suggestions, criticisms will be really welcome as we really work through this paper. And these are really preliminary results from this paper. Actually, we are really even working to a theoretical model to be able really to support really our claims, the empirical claims actually. But basically, for this part here, we kind of build from the bank's interconnection theory of some of these authors, and from there, we can derive the empirical model. Since we are looking at three questions, the first one basically will look at a simple equation like that. The Y is the credit cycle measure. The credit cycle will be measured by many ways actually. Thank you very much. The credit cycle, one of the measures of the credit cycle, we can use the Odrick filter, Odrick-Prescott, the filter from M, actually look at the trend of the credit cycle, and then from there, we can use, the variation, deviation from the trend, actually. But there are many ways of measuring. We have three measures of credit cycle in the paper. Okay. Well, the first one actually look at the credit cycle. We regress that on the capital flows from the banking sector, and then and we control for all type of all type of control we control for all type of of effects also. This is the first one. Then the second one we bring in, the second equation here, we bring in the commodity prices. Then these are the commodity prices, and then we have a cross product of commodity prices and the capital flows from the banking sector. And the third one to kind of capture, the effect of the macroprudential regulation, then we bring in the macroprudential regulation, which is actually captured by the M here. And then we have the cross product of this one. Yes. Then these are basically, the basic model we are using, to capture this effect here. Then having done that, the data here, if you look at the credit data, is coming mainly from, the BIS locational, banks, statistic. The capital flows, the cross-border capital flows, we got that from the BIS, Bank for International Settlement. And then, because, all these developed countries, most of them, they will report, actually, the cross-border banking capital flows. And then they will indicate that where those capital flows goes. Then we use that data, and the credit data are coming from the IMF, and the other variables either from the IMF, United Nations, or the World Bank, or development indicator. And then from that, we have 7 for developing and emerging countries in our sample, actually, we used for analysis. And then we have quarterly data, actually. Well, and for the commodity, because if you look at countries, well, countries do not have exactly the same commodity, then we compute actually a commodity price index. Okay, I think this is compute from 35 commodities actually. Then we have a commodity index. We compute the commodity. It's almost like the average price, right? The weighted average, and then we compute that. This CNEP will be actually our commodity price actual index. For the macroprudentials, actually we use, something from the work of Alan. This is a very recent paper. They had all these macroprudential, then they did, it's almost like collecting macroprudential rules from many, many countries. And there are many, many macroprudential rules. And then they group them into 4 categories. And then we also do that type of grouping also, to be able to capture the type of macroprudentials, regulation, which has more impact and so on. Then we do all this, and then we have this grouping here. Then we have actually 4 sub-indices, and then the whole index also. Then it's almost like 5 indices here. Well, having done that, this first table look at basically if we can find any type of actually short-term and long-term relationship between those cross-border banking capital flows and this credit cycle. Basically, it shows that I will just, put the emphasis on this or the board part. Then it shows clearly that we have not only the short term, but we also have a long term positive really relationship between these 2 years. Then when we add, actually the commodity price part here, the commodity price, we still have this positive impact, but just emphasizing this part here, the green part here, we can see basically that it kind of has this amplifying effect and so. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Well, and the last table basically is that when we include actually the macroprudential rules into, our regression here, basically these are the green part, the green, the bold, you see, the bolds. Okay. Then you can see clearly that we have a significant, but the sign is negative. That means that it has kind of attenuation effect, actually. The mitigating effect is coming from the macroprudential. But you see, also, not all macroprudentials, rules have the same impact, because some of them do not have impact, actually. Okay. That's why, actually, we use different type of macroprudential rules to be able to capture the macroprudential rule, which actually have impact, the impact on this relationship. Well, basically, this is what we do. Basically, let me just summarize, quickly, what we have done. Basically, as a conclusion, we have that cross-border banking capital flows coming from really foreign banks actually has a positive impact on the domestic credit cycle in emerging and domestic and developing economy, because our focus is really on emerging and developing economies. And then the commodity prices seems to be one of the channels through which actually this transmission actually occurs. And then when you bring in macroprudential, policy, then it seems to have an attenuation effect on the transmission. And then we think this is important, really, if we can really dig much more. As I said, this is a work in progress, but if we can really explore that, and then if a robustness test and so on, all this support this one, this is really useful, especially for the design of macroprudential policies, to be able really actually to address some of these issues and so on. Then this is Chair, this is all. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Same thing. 3 questions as long as they are short and crisp and brief and precise.
That's a lot of work.
Add another qualifying.
Listen, thanks for the paper. A brief, short observation. I would suggest you omit any variables where the quarterly measurement is questionable.
Okay.
In particular, GDP.
Yeah.
Now, it depends on which countries you have, but certainly for African countries, arguably South Africa is the only country that has reliable quarterly GDP data, at least over any reasonably long period. And there are, people may generate quarterly data, but usually all they're doing is dividing by 4 and messing it up a little bit.
No, exactly right.
And the reason I would exclude it is because you can be 100% certain that your variable has serious measurement error, and that would bias things. So just drop it, or any other variable that isn't really quarterly.
Exactly. Sure.
Any other question or comments or suggestion? Or the next slide suggestion? Yes, Ron.
Yeah, it may be a minor question, but I was a little bit surprised that your reported R-squared are 0.01, and you have so many explanatory variables, so don't they explain anything, or what's going on?
Okay.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much for this comment. I take them as not question, but suggestion, to explore much more. But, really, the omitted variable of the quarterly one. If you look at, actually, in the regression, actually, sometimes we put the GDP at the lag of 4, because of this quarterly issues and so on, but really well taken and so on. The R-square, as I said, these are really exploratory, results and so on, and then we are exploring much more and so on, but of course, these are things we should really look at much more closely and so on. Thank you very much for your comments. Yeah.
Okay.